Here we go. First 500 miles. All right, so we're gonna hear these Reinhardt slip-ons from a cold start. These suckers are loud. I just turned 500 miles on this bike and thought I'd give my experience with it so far, coming from a new rider. Prior to owning this bike, I had zero experience with motorcycles or any prior knowledge. So I bought this bike at the end of August of 2022. And obviously I didn't have my motorcycle license at that point. So I bought this bike before taking an MSF course or getting an endorsement. But when I decided I wanted a motorcycle, I did a ton of research online and YouTube and just seeing kind of what the best starter motorcycle is for a new rider. And I knew I wanted a Harley-Davidson because if I'm going to buy a bike, I want a Harley. And so a lot of people recommended the Iron 883 for new riders because it's a small bike, it's got the mid controls, doesn't have too much power to where it's going to be too torquey for a new rider, which is very true. Man, it's definitely cold out, so my visor keeps fogging up. But after watching all those YouTube videos, I decided I wanted the Iron 883. And again, I have never ridden a motorcycle, so I decided on this without having ridden one or test driven one. So I went up to the Harley dealership to look at it because I wanted to sit on it and make sure, you know, see what it feels like sitting on. And I talked to the salesperson and told him I wanted an Iron 883 as my first bike. And he's like, awesome, that's cool. Well, the assistant sales manager came over and said, oh, you don't want that bike. You're gonna come in here 6 months to a year from now wanting a bigger bike. He's like, you're gonna outgrow it so fast. But to me, I'm like, that's fine. I don't want to get a bike that's going to be too big for me or anything like that. I want something that I'm going to feel comfortable on to learn. And then if I outgrow it, awesome. Yeah, sure, I'll trade it in at that point. But I don't want a motorcycle that's going to be too torquey or too big and not easy for a new rider. So immediately they tried to get me to buy a Street Bob, which is just automatically bigger. I mean, it's got a bigger tank. That one had the forward controls, and I don't know, I'm like, you know, I get you guys are trying to help me save from trading this in eventually, but let me make that decision. So I left there without buying the bike. I did do that thing where they sit you on one of these and it's set up on a stand and you get to go through the gears and everything. Left there and did some more research, but still kind of coming back to the Iron. And so I ended up going to an Indian dealership across the highway from the Harley. And not only did they have Indians, but they had every other model of bike that you can imagine, new or used. So the salesman up there was pretty cool. I told him, hey, I wanted, looking at the Iron 883 as my first bike, but he had me sit on a bunch of other bikes just to make sure this is what I wanted. And he wasn't trying to push me on any other bikes, but he's like, hey, it helps to sit on them just to make sure. And so I sat on a bunch of different ones and kept coming back to the Iron. I'm like, he's like, yeah, you keep coming back to this. You seem the most comfortable on it. So they had a used one up there, and I was thinking about buying it used. But it had some modifications on there I didn't like, and the price between the used one and the new one I was looking at Harley was like $2,000 or $3,000 difference. And I'm like, man, I'd rather have a bike that nobody's messed with, nobody's modded, and you know, you get the full warranty on a new one. So I'm like, I'd rather pay the extra money, have a bike that I know nobody's modded out, or you know, may not have done all the proper maintenance on it. So went back to the Harley dealership and got the same salesman and, you know, told him, you know, I looked at some other bikes, but I really want the Iron 883. So after some haggling and all that stuff, I bought the bike. Unfortunately, because I did not have my motorcycle endorsement yet, or I've honestly never ridden a motorcycle, I wasn't able to test drive it, but it felt good. And, you know, all the reviews, I'm like, yeah, I want the Iron. So since I wasn't able to drive it home, the salesman actually drove it for me, which was pretty cool. And I had planned on taking the MSF course through Harley-Davidson anyway, but because it was getting towards the end of the year, the classes booked up pretty quick. So then I wasn't able to get one scheduled until kind of mid to end October. So did a lot more watching videos on learning how to ride motorcycles and stuff like that. And of course it's sitting in the garage. So I'm like, you know what? I think I got this. So went to a parking lot, drove it to a parking lot down the street and just started practicing my shifting, working on that friction zone, and got pretty comfortable on it, but didn't want to go on the main streets or anything until I took that course. So I just practiced in the parking lot down the street and kind of drove it around the neighborhood, you know, not really ever going above 40. And so then I ended up taking the MSF course through Harley. And if you're someone that's never ridden a bike before, I highly recommend that course, because they teach you things that you obviously wouldn't know, and you get really comfortable maneuvering the bike at slow speeds. So that's one thing that you wouldn't think is hard to do, but it is, just because of the weight of the bike and everything. They really get you comfortable with working the friction zone and learning how to control the bike. So after that course, you know, I was super comfortable and just took it out and started practicing more and getting more on the major roads and everything. Finally got my motorcycle endorsement, so I can legally ride this around now. But I wanted to tell you my experience with the bike since I've had it, because it hasn't gone quite as good as I have thought it would, since it was a brand new bike. So after, I don't know, probably a couple weeks of riding, I'd park it in my garage, and then I would notice that there were some oil spots in a couple different areas that showed up on the floor after I rode it and parked it. I'm like, okay, I've heard that, you know, they could put too much oil in it. Oil might be leaking out of the air cleaner, normal. So I gave it another couple weeks, and it just kept getting worse. So I put a paper towel down underneath the bike after I parked it, and you could see that there'd be several different spots that would be leaking oil. And this started happening every time. So I called the dealership, and they're like, yeah, that shouldn't happen. Bring it in, we'll take a look at it, you know, because it's under warranty. So I didn't make an appointment, but went ahead and brought it up there, and the guy's like, you know, we need to leave it for us for the day. We'll call you once we figure out what it is. Well, he called me the next day and said that, he said it's not common but not unheard of. I guess the seal over here, I guess the main seal for the engine was not sealed properly out of the factory, so they were going to have to replace the main seal on the bike. And I was kind of worried because, you know, if it's not sealed properly from the manufacturer, I mean, like, what else is going to go wrong? At this point, it's a new bike, they're going to have to tear it apart. So I had my reservations. I'm like, okay, go ahead and do it. Obviously it's under warranty. It's like, we'll need it for probably about a week. We got to order the parts for it. So a couple weeks went by and I didn't hear anything from him. So I called him and I'm like, hey, what's going on with the bike? And he's like, well, after we tore into the engine, our tech found that the piston was cracked. They have no idea how that happened. They said it obviously doesn't happen on a new bike, so they're not sure if it had anything to do with that seal or what. But they were going to do that, so they needed some more time. It's like, it'll be done by the end of the week. So I'm like, all right. At this point, I'm like, it's a new bike. I don't want to have these issues. It's fall. It's like perfect riding weather. I got this bike so I could ride it before winter. So It's like, we'll have it done, we promise. Never heard from them. Like, the weekend went over, waited a couple days during the week, and I finally called him, and he's like, oh, hey, we're sorry, but the parts are still on order, they haven't arrived yet. So at this point, I told him, I'm like, look, I bought a new bike, so I didn't have to mess with any of this. I don't feel comfortable with it now since it's got a broken seal and a cracked piston. Like, I don't know if I can rely on this bike anymore or if it's going to have any issues. And also, you know, it's riding season. You've had it for 3 weeks now, and I bought a brand new bike that I'm paying on that I can't use. So I actually ended up calling he's like, basically, sorry, there's nothing we can do. So I called and talked to the general manager, told him the story, and he's like, all right, I'll see what I can do. And I'm like, man, at this point, I kind of want to trade this in for a new bike. Like, you should just give me a new bike, since this one, you know, was not done right from the factory. It's like, well, you'd have to put a down payment on a new bike, and it'd be like buying a new one. I'm like, well, that's not acceptable. So he called me the next day. He's like, hey, I'm gonna have this done by the end of the day. So it went from, we're waiting on the parts, we don't know when it's gonna be done, to it's done the next day. So I don't know if that's just had to do with the dealership, if they were too busy and we're trying to put this off as long as I could, but kind of questionable. But ended up taking the bike home, and so far it hasn't leaked anymore. So I've started putting some things on this bike. The first thing I put on this bike was this engine guard. Being a new rider, in case I drop it, I'd rather get that scuffed up than damage any major parts on the engine. And also did the smear flip. A lot of people do that because when they're set up on the handlebars from the factory, couldn't see anything other than my shoulders. So I flipped the mirrors, and I have a video on that. I'll post a link up above. Pretty easy to do, and I think it makes the bike look cooler. Next thing, my wife actually bought me this saddlebag. Found this on Revzilla. Small little bag. The bad thing about these Sportsters is there's no storage, so there's literally nothing unless, you know, you have pockets or you bring a backpack. So this is enough to put like my hat in, my gloves, bottle of whiskey could fit in there too. But definitely recommend getting at least a little saddlebag like that. I may try and figure something else out because that's still not big enough. If I have to run some errands, I just bring a backpack and use that. And the most recent thing I've did, and I have videos on this too, is the Reinhardt 3-inch slip-on exhaust. I didn't want to do the full stage 1 kit yet because it did get pretty expensive, but I did not like that stock exhaust because it was too quiet and it did not sound like a Harley. So ended up getting these Reinhardt slip-ons, and they are loud. I don't know if you can tell from the video, but my neighbors can definitely hear when I'm taking off on the bike. And I have really bad tendonitis, so I wear earplugs anyway. I was just using the foam ones with the stock muffler, and I actually could not hear my engine revving, which was kind of another reason I wanted a louder exhaust. But with these, the foam earplugs didn't quite do it for me. It was still a little too loud. So I actually use noise canceling earbuds, and they work a lot better. Plus it's connected to my phone in case I need that. But with the earbuds in, you can still hear the engine loud and clear. No problem with that. And I did actually just get in the mail a new headlight. Riding this thing at night sucks because the stock headlights, I mean, I'll be riding it, I'm like, I don't even know if it's on. So definitely getting a new headlight. I found one off of Amazon for like 35 bucks because the ones from Harley were really expensive, and even the Daymakers from Revzilla were pretty expensive too. So I've heard a lot of good reviews on it. So it's an LED, supposed to be a lot brighter. And then I also got new front turn signals, LED lights, so that'll help with visibility as well. They light up white LED, and unless you use the turn signal, then they flash that amber color and white. So you get a lot more visibility with those as well. So I can't wait to try those out. But definitely something I recommend, especially if you're going to be riding at night. You want to be visible and you want to be able to see. So other than my problem I had with the bike and the whole thing with the service department, I don't know if that was maybe just that dealership or what, but it seems like they're kind of slow. Maybe because it was warranty work, I don't know, but it seems like once you light a fire under their ass, then they can somehow get to your bike all of a sudden. But as far as this being a bike for a new rider, I think this was a great choice and decision because it's got mid controls, it's a lighter bike, it's got the smaller gas tank so my legs aren't too spread apart, and I feel like I have really good control over this bike. There's not a lot of torque to it. It's only got like, what, 49 horsepower or something like that. So it's not gonna feel too torquey to where I feel like I'm gonna get thrown off the bike or anything. And it's just been a really good bike to learn on. Luckily, it's pretty forgiving in the shifting because we'll get up the speed here. Like, I'm pulling the throttle all the way back right now. I mean, it's getting up and going, but it's not like really pushing me back in my seat or anything. I don't feel like I'm gonna fall off. The one thing that does suck is there's no windshield or fairing. So it's pretty cold out right now, and I'm definitely feeling that wind. And man, on windy days, it's you gotta kind of hold on windy days because that wind just hits you in the chest and then it gets up under your helmet. So I do want to look at getting the Memphis Shades Road Warrior and a windshield just to help keep that wind off of me, especially at these higher speeds, because there's a lot of roads out here that are, you know, speed limit's 50, and it's doable. Like right now it's no problem, but I am getting a lot of wind on my chest, and if I go faster, depending on the wind too, I get a lot of helmet buffeting, which is uncomfortable. So if that doesn't bother you, then no need for a fairing or windshield, but I definitely think it's going to be something that I get. And I'm kind of glad to be over that 500 miles because in the manual it says not to go over certain RPMs. I think it says don't go over like 32 or 3500 RPMs to break in the engine, and then also just do like in-town riding, don't take it on the highway. So I don't plan on taking it on the highway, at least until I get a fairing, because the highway around here is I-35 and that highway sucks. There's a lot of debris that's always falling around, so I don't want to get hit with something. All right. And I'm pulling all the way back. So definitely a very controllable bike. It's enough torque to get you up to speed, but not enough to where you feel like the bike's gonna come out from underneath you. Definitely don't feel like I'm gonna pop a wheelie or anything like that. The controls are super easy. You got your turn signal on each side. You have your gear selection, so you can go through the menu. I like to have it on the RPMs, just so I know, one, what gear I'm in and what RPMs I'm at, but it also tells you your trip and your mileage. You have your horn, and then your brights are on the left side as well. The right side, you have the starter for the fuel pump, and then your engine starter. So very easy controls, very minimal bike. There's no fuel gauge, which is kind of, I wish there was a fuel gauge, but it's not a deal breaker. I think I would go about 100 miles before the gas light turns on, and then I've ridden it for about another 20 miles with that gas light. So I want to say I probably could get 150 miles on the tank of gas, which isn't terrible. I definitely want to get a new air cleaner and then tune it, even though I don't have the full exhaust. Even with the air cleaner, tune on that, you'll get better performance out of the bike just because of the way it comes out of the factory. To meet EPA standards everywhere, they don't run the best that they could. So one of these days, I'm definitely going to, probably in the springtime, get an air cleaner and a Vance & Hines fuel pack, kind of play with that, see what kind of better performance I can get out of it. Maybe a little bit better gas mileage, we'll see. But even after the MSF course, going over like 45 miles an hour I was pretty nervous about doing, but every now, you know, I just would go a little bit faster each time, take it out for longer periods of time, and it just get more comfortable. So I've gotten this thing up to 65. I feel comfortable. Once you get up and going, this bike just likes to balance it itself. It's just the only problem is on windy days, not having windshield or fairing, you do get beat up quite a bit. So I would recommend, if you're going to be taking this out on the highway, maybe looking at getting at least the cheap ones that you can mount that doesn't have the fairing, to see if that'll help. And depending on your size, you know, you may have to get a bigger one or smaller one, so it serves the purpose of blocking the wind but also not giving you too much head buffeting, which you can get if you get one too small. But yeah, I don't really have any winter gear. This jacket's kind of one of those mesh jackets, but it has a windbreaker inside, which helps. And I'm wearing a hoodie. I think it's like mid 40s right now. And so I have the Harley-Davidson helmet, and there's really no good shin curtain. So I was getting a lot of wind coming up underneath where the chin guard would be, and days like today, it's really cold. So I ended up getting a neck gaiter, a fleece one, and it definitely helps. I have it kind of my chin tucked into the neck gaiter, and even though the wind is still coming in the helmet, it doesn't feel as cold on my face. So it definitely helps to get a neck gaiter if you don't have a good chin curtain on your helmet. But I'm definitely wanting to keep the visor down because it is cold. But when I do, it just keeps fogging up, so it's kind of annoying. So I'm trying to leave it cracked. But I don't want to get too much wind noise in the microphone, so we'll see what happens. But what drew me to this bike is just the look of it. Like, I know soft tails, chromed out were kind of the big thing in the early 2000s. And those look okay, but I love the look of the Sportster. I love the black denim, the kind of all blacked out look. It just looks really cool to me anyway. I'm not a huge fan of the look of the big baggers. However, after riding this bike, I see why you would want a bagger bike with the big fairing and the bags and stuff, because it's more practical, especially if you're doing longer rides and for highway riding. I mean, there's no cruise control on this, so if you do take this on a highway trip or something, you're gonna have to go without cruise control. But I like the look of these Sportsters. Unfortunately, this is the last year with this Evo engine, so they discontinued these bikes just because EPA standards. They want to go to they really want to push their Sportster S's and stuff like that. But I'm glad I got this just because I wanted a classic Harley. I love the sound of this engine. The amount of aftermarket parts that are available for these Sportsters are just unreal. So the cool thing about these, and really any Harley, is you can make it your own. And that's why I wanted to go with a stock bike, because nobody's messed with it. And after I got some experience with it, I can modify it to me. And that's what I've been doing, and got a lot more stuff in the works for it. I can see how I would want to upgrade to a bigger engine or maybe a bigger bike with some bags, but I definitely think I want to keep this bike since it is the last year of them, and it's just a fun around the city bike, like cruising around the city, especially in the spring, summertime. Luckily, I was able to take this out when it was still warm, and it was fun. Although it did get pretty hot sitting at a stoplight. Since this engine is air cooled, when you're not moving, the engine's not cooling down. So if you're sitting at a stoplight in full gear, you do get pretty hot. So that is the one downside. And this bike does vibrate a lot. So if you're somebody that wants a smooth ride, not a lot of vibration, this might not be the bike for you, because you do feel this thing vibrate. And I've already had the screw that holds on the seat that screws into the rear fender fall off. I went to the dealership to pick up a new one, and I told him what happened. He was like, yeah, that happens. So I got this aftermarket one from Harley, where instead of using a Phillips one that you just screwed on with your fingers, and it seems to work a lot better. Plus, if it comes loose or I need to check if it's tight, I don't have to worry about having a screwdriver. I'm just able to use it with my hands. And one thing you definitely want to do is kind of check your screws and everything on this bike, make sure everything's tight. You know, if you're sitting on a stoplight, you can physically see the bike shaking. So it's not uncommon for things to probably come loose because of that over time. So I would recommend every now and then just making sure everything is tightened down just to be safe. The stock seat on this, it's not terrible. Obviously I don't have it well broken in since I only got 500 miles on it. But one complaint that I hear from a lot of people is the seat's uncomfortable. I could see that, you know, if I were to take this out on a long cruise, that it would become uncomfortable. And I was looking at aftermarket seats, and I'm kind of torn between the Lapera kickflip or the Saddleman step up, just because I do want to have that back support, a little bit of back support, and then also have that passenger seat in case my wife ever wants to ride the bike once I get more experience with it. So the only downside to those is they are pretty expensive. So I think I'm going to wait until I kind of wear out this seat, because right now it's fine, but I can see how it will probably eventually get too worn in and become uncomfortable. And at that point, then I'll replace it. But right now, just kind of working on some other modifications, so I'll kind of hold off on that one as long as I can. But right now, I'm going about 55. No issues. It's not very windy today. My fingers are starting to get a little cold. These are pretty thin leather gloves from Harley, so they're not very thick. So my fingers are starting to feel it in my hands. But definitely feel comfortable on this bike. My only regret is I didn't get one sooner. Oh, and that little squeak reminds me, for whatever reason, the front brakes on these things are known to squeak, which is not a big deal, but sucks because it's a new bike and your brakes are squeaking. I don't want to be pulling up to a stoplight and my brakes squeaking and somebody's like, oh god, that guy can't keep maintenance to his bike, or it's a crappy bike. No, it's just a thing with whatever these stock brakes, they tend to squeak. Kind of annoying though. Doesn't do it every time, but it seems to do it in the most inconvenient time. You definitely hear the shift. It is very clunky and loud, audible shifting on this bike, so you definitely can hear it when you shift in the gear, which is nice. I mean, I have no problem with that. I know I'm hitting that gear that I needed to. But one thing about the transmission on this bike is it is kind of difficult to find neutral. It's like a half a click up from first or half a click down from second. But for whatever reason, it's kind of hard to find it on this bike. Like, you have to be super light on that half click, otherwise you're going to go right past it. So it definitely takes some getting used to on trying to find that neutral. So that's been my experience so far as a new rider with the 2022 Iron 883. If you guys have any questions for me, let me know down in the comments, or if you have any tips for a new rider, let me know as well. Any tips or feedback is appreciated, as you know, I'm constantly learning and still trying to get comfortable on this bike, especially around here, because I live in the suburbs and there's a lot of traffic, especially on these main roads. A lot of schools around here. Luckily, that area where I was with the park, there's not a whole lot of traffic, but between there and my house, quite a bit of traffic, which sucks. A lot of stoplights too. I appreciate you guys checking out this video. Definitely something new. Definitely just my first riding experience with the GoPro too, so I was testing out the camera and the mic, so let me know how it sounds. I am using the media mod with the microphone, and I have 2 windscreens on the microphone just to help reduce any wind noise. So let me know how it sounds. hit that subscribe button to see kind of what my journey with this bike as a new rider and the different modifications that I do to this bike. Let me know what you guys are doing to your bike, what upgrades you recommend doing to this bike or you have done with yours. Go ahead and check out this video here where I go over the Reinhardt slip-on install and then do a sound comparison.